The story begins with a young man stepping onto the sprawling campus of one of the most prestigious universities in the country. He had worked tirelessly to get here, trading sleepless nights and endless sacrifices for this opportunity. For him, it wasn't just about earning a degree, it was about proving something to himself and to the world. But as he walked through the grand archways and past the manicured lawns, he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't quite belong. This university was known for its elite status, filled with students who came from families where success seemed almost inherited. Their parents were CEOs, politicians, or renowned academics. The young man, on the other hand, grew up in a modest neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, but dreams were plenty. His journey to this point had been anything but easy. And now, standing amidst these towering buildings, he felt both pride and doubt tugging at him. On his first day, he introduced himself during an orientation session. As he spoke, he noticed a few raised eyebrows and sideways glances from some of the professors. They weren't outright rude, but their subtle expressions said enough. They didn't expect much from him. It wasn't something new. He'd faced skepticism before. People often judged him based on the color of his skin or the accent in his voice, assuming he didn't have what it took to succeed in such a competitive environment. But he knew better. He carried within him not just determination, but also a secret that could change how people saw him, if they ever found out. During his first week, he attended lectures and tried to blend in. Yet, every time he raised his hand to answer a question, there was a pause, a brief moment when the professor would look at him as if surprised he even dared to speak. At first, he brushed it off, telling himself it was all in his head. But soon, those moments added up. A sarcastic comment here, a dismissive tone there. It became clear that some of the professors had already made up their minds about him. Despite the growing tension, he refused to let it break him. Instead, he used it as fuel. Every snide remark only pushed him harder to prove them wrong. Deep down, though, he wondered how long he could keep quiet about who he really was. Because while they underestimated him, he held knowledge and skills far beyond what anyone in that room imagined. And someday, they would find out. Just not yet. The young man quickly realized that the challenges he faced weren't going to be limited to tough coursework or late-night study sessions. It was something deeper, more personal. In one of his early classes, a professor posed a question about a complex theory. He had studied this topic extensively before transferring, so when no one else raised their hand, he confidently offered an answer. His response was clear, concise, and accurate. Or at least, it should have been enough to earn a nod of approval. But instead of acknowledgement, the professor smirked. "Interesting," the professor said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Did you read that online somewhere? Or maybe someone helped you with it?" A few students chuckled nervously, unsure whether to join in or stay silent. The young man felt his cheeks burn, but he didn't let the comment rattle him. He simply repeated his explanation, adding even more detail to prove his understanding. Still, the professor dismissed him with a wave of his hand and moved on to another student. This wasn't a one-time incident. Over the next few days, similar situations unfolded in different classes. Another professor seemed particularly eager to challenge him during discussions, often interrupting him mid-sentence or questioning the validity of his points. At first, the young man thought it might just be tough love, a way to push him to work harder. But as the remarks grew sharper, it became obvious that this wasn't about helping him grow. It was about making him feel small. What made it worse was how some of the other students reacted. While a handful looked uncomfortable or even sympathetic, others laughed along with the professors, feeding into the awkward dynamic. The young man could see it in their eyes. Some of them doubted him too. They assumed he didn't belong here, that he must have slipped through the cracks somehow. But what they didn't know was that he had earned his place, not just by meeting requirements, but by surpassing them. One day, after yet another public jab from a professor, he sat alone in the library, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. He clenched his fists, feeling anger bubbling inside him. Who were these people to decide his worth? He knew he was capable, He knew he had worked harder than most of them could imagine, but he also knew that lashing out wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he reminded himself why he was here: to learn, to grow, and to show the world what he was truly capable of. Still, he couldn't help but wonder, how long would he have to endure this? And when, if ever, would they see him for who he really was? For now, all he could do was keep his head down and focus on proving them wrong, one step at a time. But deep down, he knew that patience had its limits. Sooner or later, the truth would come out. And when it did, it would change everything. Behind the quiet confidence of the young man lay a secret that could turn the entire university upside down. To everyone around him, he was just another student, trying to keep up with the demands of an elite institution. But what they didn't know was that his journey had started long before he stepped foot on this campus. Years ago, while still in his early 20s, he had already made waves in a field most people couldn't even pronounce correctly. Before transferring to this prestigious university, he had been part of groundbreaking research that pushed the boundaries of science and technology. He worked alongside some of the brightest minds in the world, contributing ideas so innovative that they were implemented by major organizations. His work wasn't just theoretical, it had real-world applications that impacted industries globally, and yet no one at the university knew any of this. Not the professors who doubted him, not the students who whispered about him, not even the administration that processed his application. The reason? He had chosen to keep it hidden. Success, he believed, shouldn't rely on titles or past achievements. It should stand on its own merit. So when he applied to the university, he submitted only what was required: his grades, his essays, and his passion for learning. There was no mention of awards, patents, or projects that had earned him recognition under a pseudonym. He wanted to be judged solely on his present abilities, not on what he'd done before. But as the days passed and the dismissive remarks from professors piled up, he found himself questioning whether staying silent was the right choice. Every time someone mocked his answers or implied he didn't belong, he felt a surge of frustration. These weren't harmless jokes. They were attempts to undermine his credibility. And while he tried to brush it off, the weight of their words lingered. One evening, sitting alone in his dorm room, he opened an old laptop and scrolled through files filled with notes, diagrams, and equations. These documents represented years of hard work that had changed lives and solved problems others deemed impossible. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what would happen if he revealed everything. Would it silence the doubters, or would it make things worse? He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Revealing his true identity might shift the power dynamic, but it wasn't why he came here. He wanted to earn respect based on his current efforts, not ride on past accomplishments. Still, the thought lingered in his mind like a spark waiting to ignite. If the professors continued down this path, sooner or later, they'd force his hand. And when that day came, nothing would prepare them for the truth. The tension reached its peak during a high-stakes seminar where students were expected to present their research findings. The young man had spent weeks preparing for this moment, pouring all his energy into crafting a presentation that would not only meet the rigorous standards of the course, but also showcase his unique perspective. He knew this was an opportunity to prove himself, to show everyone in that room what he was truly capable of. When his turn came, he stood confidently at the front, his voice steady as he began explaining his project. It was a complex mathematical model designed to solve a problem that had puzzled experts for decades. Step by step, he walked the audience through his process, breaking down intricate equations and connecting them to real-world applications. His delivery was clear, his explanations sharp, and his confidence undeniable. As he spoke, some students leaned forward in their seats, clearly impressed by the depth of his work. But then, just as he concluded, one of the professors who had been particularly harsh toward him raised a hand. "Excuse me," the professor said, his tone laced with condescension. "Are you telling us that you came up with this?" The room fell silent. The question hung in the air like a challenge, daring him to defend himself. Before he could respond, the professor smirked and added, "It's impressive, sure, but let's be honest. Did someone help you with this? Or did you borrow it from somewhere?" The young man froze for a split second, the weight of the accusation sinking in. He felt the eyes of the entire class on him, some curious, others skeptical. For weeks, he had endured subtle jabs and dismissive comments, but this was different. This wasn't just doubt, it was outright disrespect. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "No," he replied firmly, meeting the professor's gaze without flinching. "I developed this entirely on my own. If you'd like, I can explain every single step in detail." His tone was polite but unyielding, leaving no room for argument. The professor hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the young man's composure. But instead of backing down, the professor doubled down, accusing him of plagiarism and suggesting that someone else must have guided his work. By now, murmurs rippled through the room. Some students exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to react. Others looked angry, sensing the unfairness of the situation. For the young man, this was the breaking point. He realized that no matter how hard he worked or how much he proved himself, there would always be people unwilling to see his true potential. They weren't challenging his ideas, they were challenging him. As he packed up his notes after the presentation, he made a decision. Enough was enough. These professors had underestimated him for the last time. If they refused to acknowledge his abilities, then he would make sure they couldn't ignore the truth any longer. What they didn't know was that the truth was far bigger and far more extraordinary than anything they could have imagined. The next faculty meeting was supposed to be routine, a chance for professors to discuss upcoming projects, review student progress, and address any concerns. What they didn't expect was the bombshell that awaited them. As the department chair called the meeting to order, she introduced an unexpected guest speaker, the young man who had been at the center of so much controversy. When he walked into the room, there were murmurs of surprise. No one had seen this coming. The professors exchanged puzzled glances, unsure why a student would be invited to speak at a formal gathering like this. But as he took his place at the front of the room, the atmosphere shifted. He carried himself with quiet confidence, setting up a projector and flipping through slides without hesitation. Then, he began to speak. His presentation started simply, enough, outlining key concepts in advanced theoretical physics. At first, the professors listened politely, assuming it was just another academic talk. But as he delved deeper, their expressions changed. His ideas weren't just impressive, they were revolutionary. He explained how he had developed algorithms that solved problems experts had been struggling with for years. He shared diagrams, data, and real-world applications, all backed by meticulous research. By the time he reached the halfway point, even the most skeptical among them were leaning forward, captivated. Then came the moment that left everyone speechless. He revealed that this wasn't just theoretical work. It had already been implemented by major institutions worldwide. Governments, tech companies, and scientific organizations had adopted his innovations, crediting him, under a pseudonym, for breakthroughs that had saved time, money, and resources. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. This wasn't some naive student trying to keep up. He was a pioneer whose contributions had reshaped entire fields. As he wrapped up his presentation, he turned to face the two professors who had mocked him. Their faces were pale, their earlier smirks replaced by looks of sheer disbelief. "You question my abilities," he said calmly, his voice steady but firm. "But I'm not here to prove anything to you anymore. I wanted to earn respect based on my current efforts, but your actions made that impossible. So now, I'm showing you what you refused to see." The silence that followed was deafening. The department chair broke it first, thanking him for his insights and apologizing on behalf of the faculty. Other professors chimed in, their words filled with regret and awe. For the two who had doubted him, though, there was no hiding their shame. They had spent weeks belittling someone who was, quite literally, light years ahead of them in knowledge and skill. When the meeting ended, the young man walked out of the room, knowing he had finally silenced his critics, not with anger or retaliation, but with undeniable proof of his brilliance. And while part of him felt vindicated, another part wondered if they would truly learn from this experience, or if they'd simply move on, unchanged. Word about the young man's true identity spread like wildfire across campus. By the next morning, it felt like everyone was talking about it, from students huddled over coffee in the cafeteria to professors whispering in the hallways. Some were shocked, others embarrassed, but most couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The same person they had underestimated for weeks was now being hailed as one of the brightest minds in modern science. For many, it forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about their own biases and assumptions. The two professors who had mocked him publicly issued apologies, both in writing and during class. They admitted they had been wrong to question his abilities and promised to do better moving forward. While some students appreciated the gesture, others rolled their eyes, knowing that words alone wouldn't erase what had happened. The young man accepted their apology with grace, but he didn't sugarcoat his feelings. During a candid conversation with the department chair, he emphasized that real change would require more than just empty promises. It needed action, concrete steps to ensure no student would ever face the kind of treatment he endured. Inspired by his courage, other students began speaking up too. A group of underrepresented students organized a forum to share their experiences, inviting faculty members to listen and learn. The turnout was overwhelming, with hundreds packing into the auditorium. Stories poured out about feeling invisible, about being dismissed or overlooked because of race, gender, or background. For the first time, many of these voices were heard, not just by peers, but also by those in positions of power. The young man played a key role in this movement, using his platform to amplify others. He started mentoring younger students, especially those from marginalized communities, helping them navigate challenges similar to the ones he had faced. Whether it was reviewing essays, practicing presentations, or simply offering advice on how to handle difficult professors, he became a source of strength and guidance. His message was clear. Success wasn't just about personal achievement, it was about lifting others along the way. As graduation approached, the university announced several initiatives aimed at creating a more inclusive environment. Scholarships were established specifically for underrepresented students. Workshops were introduced to address implicit bias among faculty, and committees were formed to review policies that disproportionately affected minority groups. None of these changes happened overnight, but they marked the beginning of a shift, a recognition that talent comes in all forms and from all backgrounds. For the young man, these developments were bittersweet. On one hand, he was proud to have sparked meaningful conversations and reforms. On the other, he knew there was still so much work to be done. As he stood on stage to receive his diploma, the applause echoing through the auditorium, he reminded himself why he had come here in the first place, not for accolades, but to make a difference. And while his journey at the university was ending, his mission to break barriers and inspire others was only just beginning. Years passed, and the young man's story became a legend on campus. New students heard whispers of it during orientation week, how one student had turned the tables on those who doubted him, leaving behind a legacy that stretched far beyond his time at the university. But what truly set him apart wasn't just his brilliance. It was how he used his experience to pave the way for others. After graduation, he didn't chase fame or fortune. Instead, he dedicated himself to democratizing education. He traveled to underserved communities, setting up programs to bring advanced learning tools to schools with limited resources. He worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between privilege and opportunity, ensuring that kids from all walks of life could dream big without being held back by their circumstances. His message was simple, yet powerful. Greatness isn't reserved for the elite. It belongs to anyone willing to fight for it. Back at the university, his impact continued to ripple through generations. The scholarships created in his honor helped dozens of students attend the institution who otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford it. Faculty training sessions now included mandatory modules on recognizing and addressing bias, inspired by the conversations he had sparked. Even the professors who had once doubted him found themselves reflecting on their actions, striving to be better educators and mentors. For the students who followed in his footsteps, he became more than just a role model. He was proof that resilience could overcome prejudice, that talent couldn't be silenced forever. They often shared stories about how his journey motivated them to push past their own doubts and fears. Some even went on to achieve extraordinary things themselves, crediting him as the spark that lit their path. As for the young man, he remained humble despite his accomplishments. When asked about his time at the university, he never spoke bitterly about the challenges he faced. Instead, he framed them as lessons, not just for himself, but for everyone involved. "They underestimated me," he would say with a small smile, "but I hope they learned something too." We're all capable of more than we think, and sometimes it takes someone challenging us to see that. His work earned him recognition worldwide, but awards and titles meant little to him compared to the lives he touched. He believed success was measured not by personal milestones, but by the positive change you left behind, and in that sense, he had succeeded beyond measure. Today, when people talk about his story, it's not just as a tale of triumph over adversity. It's a reminder that brilliance often hides where we least expect it, and that judging someone based on appearances only limits our ability to see the extraordinary potential within them. His legacy lives on in every student who dares to defy expectations, in every teacher who chooses encouragement over doubt, and in every person who refuses to let others define their worth. Because of him, the world became a little brighter. One mind, one heart, one opportunity at a time.